welcome. Good day. Thank you for joining our author talk here at Gwinnett County Public Library. My name is Amy Perry, and I'm an adult services specialist here at the library. Today, our guest author will discuss her book, The Perfect Story: How to Tell Stories That Inform, Influence, and Inspire. There will be an opportunity to ask questions throughout her talk, and books are also available for purchase and signing. Now I'd like to introduce Karen Eber. Karen is an author, international consultant, and keynote speaker. She is also a TED speaker with the popular talk, How Your Brain Responds to Stories and Why They're Crucial for Leaders. As CEO and Chief Storyteller for Eber Leadership Group, Karen helps companies build leaders, teams, and culture one story at a time. Please welcome Karen Eber.
I have two different colored eyes. I have a brown eye and a green eye. Hi. So it's my favorite thing about myself. I have a built-in answer to tell me something interesting about yourself. And as much as I love it, I could always tell the exact moment when people would realize my eyes are different colors. Their eyes would start looking back and forth between mine. It's like their brain is going, do I look at the brown one or the green one? Or the brown one or the green one? And I would brace myself because I knew what was coming. Every single time it would be, do you know you have two different color eyes? That would be my response, to which I would be like, no, you're kidding, what? Then the next comment was always, I know a dog with two different colored eyes. To which I would be like, thank you, like, what do you do with that? And then we would be in the script. That would always happen. David Bowie, he had two different color eyes. No, he had an accident. One pupil was dilated. He had the same color eyes. But then we got into the fun questions. What color eyes do your parents have? Do you see the same colors out of each eye? Do your eyes give you special powers? And I just would be defeated because this thing that I love now made me this odd spectacle that nobody knew what to do with. They'd start calling their friends over. There would be 5 faces like trying to see my eyes, just like you're trying to do now. Like, let me see these different color eyes she's talking about. And this thing that was my favorite thing now was this thing that was so uncomfortable. And they would ask, how did that happen? And one day I was like, you know what? No more of this. We're going to do something different. Next time I got that how did that happen question story, I'm like, well, I was born with brown eyes. I was in my room coloring one night, and you know how we all have that big box of crayons that you throw them into? For me, it was a cigar box. You have like the broken ones and the peeled ones and the perfect ones. Reached into the box, pulled out a green crayon. Didn't really smell like anything. Took a bite, and it had a really interesting texture. So I ate it, and I liked it. So I reached in the box, and I ate another, and another, and another, and I woke up the next day, and my eye was green. Their response wasn't quite that. Their response was always like, logic tells me your eyes did not change colors because you ate crayons, but you said it so convincingly. I'm not quite sure what to make of it. And I would let them off the hook and tell them that, no, my eyes did not change colors because I ate crayons. But it created this shift. So we went from this awkward moment where I felt like a sideshow in a circus on display to having this moment of connection where they realized they actually asked me, do you see the same colors out of each eye? This is where I recognize, wow, stories can make a difference in any situation, even what feels like these most artificial of circumstances. One of the people here in the audience I've known since kindergarten, and I am curious, do you remember me telling that story? It's okay if you don't. I'm just curious if...
Not specifically, but I'm thinking Mrs. Jeffords must be counting crayons right now.
Yeah. Yes, so Jody and I were in kindergarten together, and that is probably, 6 or 7 is about the age that I probably decided to embrace my sarcasm and start telling that story. She probably is counting her crayons. So I am Karen Eber. I do own my own company that helps people learn how to be better leaders, but also how to embrace storytelling. And I wanted to spend time with you today talking about that. I wrote this book, which I thought we could talk about some of the pieces in it, talk about the behind the scenes of how it came to be. This is gonna be way more fun if you ask questions throughout, because that way you'll get any specific question you want answered, and I'll make sure we get there. So don't feel like you have to wait till the end. I welcome all the questions. I am stalling a little bit because I was trying to see if a guest for one of our stories was gonna arrive.
I have a question already.
Okay, let's hear your question.
How old were you when you became comfortable with the two-color? You said you finally accepted it and became comfortable. Do you remember how?
I was always comfortable with it. So the question, just to make sure we get it for the audio for the recording, was how old were you when you became comfortable with your eyes? I was always comfortable with them. I loved them. What I didn't like was the interaction that started to happen.
Did that get to where it was like?
When I started to tell this story and it changed that energy in that moment, that changed that interaction and it made it fun.
And do you remember your age when you started to tell? Were you?
I think I started to tell it like 6 or 7. Yeah, I embraced sarcasm at a very early age. This was something that was very, very readily available to me.
That story answers the question about the green.
Yes. So if you're wondering why is there a green crayon on the book, this, spoiler alert, we have taken you into it. Some of the things I thought I would go through today is a little bit of how the book came to be, what inspired it, and where the focus of it came from. Talk a bit about some of the pieces of the book, some of the science behind it, and what is making stories interesting and compelling, and the TED Talk. We can talk about anything you want. So I've got a few things prepared, but I will guide you with stories. And I want to start telling you about Maria. Maria was walking into the office one day at work, and you have too many things in your hands. She had her bag, her lunch, her phone, folders. She's walking into the elevator, goes to press the button, and the phone just falls out of her hand, bounces on the floor, and whoosh, goes between the elevator cart and the floor, straight down to the basement. She can hear it hit the basement floor 3 stories below. Gotta navigate the table. She hears it hit the basement floor below and has the oh no moment. It's an iPhone, she has an Apple Watch, and she can ping it and see that it is actually still amazingly working. So she's standing in the elevator door, trying to figure out what to do, and realizes that had my badge, my driver's license, my credit cards. Like, I can't go to my office, I can't go to my car. This is my whole life. So she goes to the front desk to talk to Ray. Ray's the security guard in the building. And as he sees her, he is so excited because most people walk by him in the morning and do the polite, head nod. I'm not saying anything to you, but I'm acknowledging you. But Maria always stops and says hello. She knows where he took his last vacation, his favorite food, what movie he likes, because she's one of these people that just really cares, wants people to feel seen and understood. So he sees her coming up and he is delighted. He's smiling really big until she tells him what happened. And his smile starts to fade as he tells her, this is gonna be super expensive. We're gonna have to call in a service call. They're gonna have to shut down all the elevators in the building, get down to the basement. It's gonna be at least $500 to do that. She says, please just make the call. Let's see what happens. If it's under $250, do it. I'm walking through the lobby at this moment on Maria's best day, and I see her, and I have my badge, so I'm like, well, let me take you up to your office. And she's telling me what happened. We get to her office, and she's not there more than 5 minutes when the phone rings. It's Ray. Maria, I was looking in the inspection certificate in the elevator. It's due for its annual inspection next month. I'm gonna call it in today. We'll be able to get your phone. It won't cost you anything. So I am reading an article a few days later. It's in the New York Times, and it's about Walt Benninger, the CEO of Charles Schwab. He was a straight A student in university, walking in his last exam, expecting to ace it, had been preparing all the notes, gets in there and is so excited to graduate, gets in the room, laughing and talking with his friends, and the professor hands out the exam papers, tells everyone to turn it over, and it's blank. And they're all looking around the room confused. Why do we have a blank exam? The professor says, I've taught you everything there is to know about business except this one thing. What is the name of the person that cleans this room? What is the name of the person that cleans this room? And he failed. He had seen her, but he hadn't met her. He didn't know her name, and he learned her name was Dottie. And he vowed that day to always know the Dotties in his life, because like Maria, he feels it's so key to help people feel seen and valued. I shared that story at General Electric when I was the head of culture. So I was in a position where we had 90,000 employees in 150 countries, and I was trying to help the leaders understand who they should be as leaders and what they could do different. And putting out a bunch of leadership principles wasn't going to do it. But what I found with this story is we all become Walter Maria. We all have these moments where we think like, what would I do? Would Ray have known me? Would he have wanted to help me? Would I have known Dottie? Who are the Dotties I should know? And I found that stories are this way. It's the sizable technology at scale. It's the way to touch each person and have them think about, what does this mean for me? So Maria, will you please stand up? For real, please stand up. This is the Maria. This story opens the book, and I dissect it through the book, and so it's only fair you get to meet the Maria. You can see why I was stalling a little bit, trying to have her get here. All of that is true. Any comments?
So sorry that I'm late.
It was part of the conversation.
Actually, do you want to share the case that was on the phone?
Very simple. Oh my. And the pinging still works. I never leave her phone.
I've had people over the years email me and say, what was the case that woman used? It's in Incipio, in case anyone's looking for an amazing case. Also, fun fact, so many people end up on my website because they clearly have dropped their phones down an elevator shaft, and they're with a friend trying to figure out what to do, and they end up there because of this story. So thank you, Maria. I know I didn't tell you I was doing that. I use this story, though, because we all connect to it. It doesn't matter who you are. You can picture, wow, what would that be like? What would I have done in that situation? And so I told that story as the opening of my TED Talk to help people start to think about why storytelling is so key as a leader. There's a bunch of things that happen neurologically when you are listening to stories, which we can get into, that makes up the premise of this book. So not long after my talk went on TED, I had some literary agents come knock on my door and say, we think there's a book here. And I'm like, I'm so glad you said that. I do too. But I don't think the world needs another storytelling book. There's so many out there. So I knew if I did it, I wanted to do something different. And what I wanted to do is help people understand what's happening in the brain when you are listening to stories. Because when you start to understand this, you can then factor some of these things into your stories. It's actually not enough to tell a story. The way you tell it makes a difference. So there's research from this neuroscientist, Dr. Paul Zak. He has found a way to measure through watches. So if you ever watch like this, it can measure changes in your skin and measure when this hormone oxytocin spikes. So what happens when you're listening to a story is the listener develops empathy for the storyteller. Like the very fact you're telling a story makes me be like, oh, my brain says, look, she's telling a story, he's telling a story. And it starts to develop empathy and release some oxytocin when it's a great story. That leads to an increase in trust. So Dr. Paul Zak found a way to measure how can we see when someone is really immersed in a story. And he went into a bar and he took Super Bowl commercials because what is better than these fun 30-second commercials? And there was one by Budweiser in 2015 you might remember. I was a puppy. golden lab, running up to the barn door where a Clydesdale bends down and they like nuzzle noses. Yeah, it sounds familiar. I'll recount it in case you didn't see this. So these friends are always trying to be together. The owner of the barn finds the puppy, picks him up, and carries him through this well-worn path back to his home next door, where you see the sign, "Puppies for Sale." He places the puppy back home, and day after day, this puppy is like wiggling under fences and rolling around through dirt to get back to his friend, the Clydesdale. Pretty quickly, he's put in the back of the car. He's pawing at the window, he's yelping, and his Clydesdale buddy starts stomping the ground, calling all his friends, and as the car is driving off down the dirt road, all the Clydesdales go thundering after it. They surround the car, stop it, and the shot ends with the puppy and the Clydesdale running back up the road with best buds. It's adorable. You see the story and you're like, oh, but it was a complete failure. This one, this was nominated for Emmys. It was the commercial that everybody said, this is such a cool story, but it failed because it didn't create enough tension in the brain. It didn't create this release of oxytocin. It was a great bedtime story. It would be great for kids to wind them down and put them into bed, but there wasn't enough there because what happens when you see the puppy run up to the Clydesdale is your brain is like, I know it's gonna happen. They're friends, they're gonna get separated, they're gonna find their way back together. And as soon as your brain does this, it's like, I know it's gonna happen, so I'm just gonna take a breather. I'm watching, but I'm not really engaged. What we've found is that there are things like this happening all the time when we tell stories. And we know, because we have all sat through terrible stories. The relative at the dinner table that is telling the same story over and over. The person on social media that can't start their story because they're like, it was Tuesday and I was headed over here trying to do, no, maybe it was Monday. And I forgot my purse. And you're like, where's the story? It's not enough to tell a story, and the way you tell it makes a difference. And that's what I wanted to break down in this book. Share some of the science in a relatable way so that you can understand what's happening and think about what to factor into your stories. So if it's okay, I'd love to share with you what I call the 5 factory settings of the brain. And if that sounds scary, this is not gonna be beaker and lab coat science. This is gonna be super relatable. Because I want you to think of when you come home from a long day, you are exhausted, you sit on the couch and you turn on your favorite TV show or your favorite movie. What are you watching? What are you putting on?
The Property Brothers.
The Property Brothers, yes. And you're like, yeah, what are some others? What are other people? What's your favorite like go-to comfort binge show? Golden Girls. Sophia coming out there, right? Yeah. So what happens in these moments when you put these things on? What's your brain saying? I just want to relax. I don't want to think. I want to decompress. This is the number one thing we're fighting in storytelling. Your brain is lazy. Number one goal is to keep you alive. So your brain is this broker of calories. And there's a bucket of calories dedicated to certain systems that are non-negotiables. You're breathing, you're running all your bodily functions. It's always going to put calories towards that. But it has this slush fund. This extra bucket of bonus calories that go to, are you paying attention? How much effort are you really giving? Are you focusing? We think that we're meant to be like fully immersed and focused all day long, but we're not. Our brains are meant to dip in and out because it needs to have moments where it feels lazy. It's what keeps your body alive. The problem is that when you tell a story, if there isn't enough tension, if you don't have unexpected details or things for it to grab onto, it's going to take that moment and tune out. It's going to say, we're just going to put on Golden Girls and chill, because this is a good time to save calories. So what this means when you're telling stories is how are you ultimately making the brain spend calories? How are you kicking it out of lazy mode? And you do that by putting in details like her phone dropped down the opening between the cart and the floor, and now you're like, what happened? I can only imagine how awful that is, right? So that's first factory setting. The second is that we love to make assumptions. Our brains hate for things to be incomplete. So it's always making predictions and assumptions, and part of it is because of the calories. It's predicting, how do I need to set my foot to walk? But it's also predicting, what is she going to say? Where's that movie going? Can I guess what the end of this book is? The faster we can make an assumption and prediction, the faster we can conserve calories. Our brain always wants to be on the forefront, making predictions versus reacting, because reacting in uncertainty is really expensive on the body. So what this means is when you're telling a story, you either want to lean into assumptions, like if I said to you, he came from a town with 2 traffic lights, that immediately creates some assumptions for you, doesn't it? Small town, maybe doesn't have huge exposure to things. You either want to lean into assumptions or you want to disrupt them. Like, did he know the name of the person that cleans this room? Again, this is about slowing down those assumptions and getting people to spend some calories. The third one is that we have this brain that is a library of files of experiences. So as we're taking information in through our senses, they get stamped with emotions. It's kind of like if you take a photo on your phone and you swipe up and you see the date and the f-stop and the file size and all this stuff is stamped on the photo without you doing anything. Something similar happens with our emotions. As we're having experiences and taking things in, they're getting stamped with emotions. You spend an afternoon and you smell the fragrance of a loved one and it can put you right back with the time you spent with them. It's because you've had this experience that's stored in your long-term memory. The challenge is, because we each have this library of files of things we've experienced or related to things we've experienced, they are different. So when we're going to make predictions, they're all going to be different because we have different experiences. If I put up an ink blot and asked you what you saw, we get 10 different answers because you have 10 different experiences. So what this means in stories is you want to anchor to what people know. You want to connect them to the things that are familiar to them. So you've seen this when there's a natural disaster on the news or the Cathedral of Notre Dame was on fire. When you watch the news, they put up a map and they show you the cathedral, but they also show you the Eiffel Tower, which has absolutely nothing to do with it, but it's an anchor. It's anchoring to what you know, because when I think of Paris, I think of the Eiffel Tower and look where it is, and oh, okay, I get it. When you're telling stories, you want to connect people to the things that they know and bring them in. This is usually with similes and metaphors, because what you're doing is putting this fully formed image in their mind. The last two are all about the person's experience. So we seek in groups and out groups. You walked in this room and you tried to guess which chair you should sit in. Like, who am I going to sit next to? What stranger am I going to make small talk with? Who feels comfortable to approach? We all do that because we naturally look for these in groups and out groups. So in groups are where there are people or situations or values that feel similar to us, that feel comfortable. Out groups are where we notice differences. So in a company, everyone's a part of the same in group, but HR is a little different than engineering. Right? You start to have these different experiences and these different feelings. In sales, you want to tell stories of in-groups because it's I'll have what she's having. I want that. I want to be a part of that, what that will give me. But charities tell the stories of out-groups. The Red Cross will profile one person in a natural disaster, and they will tell the story of how they've lost electricity, are struggling for food, are trying to get clothing, and you're listening to this in electricity next to food and clothing, and you realize how different your circumstances are. So you have this choice of, am I telling a story where people feel a part of something? Or am I telling a story where they feel different, they feel outside of it? And the last one is at our most simplest level, we seek pleasure and avoid pain. So we have the pleasure neurochemicals of oxytocin and dopamine and serotonin, all these feel-good neurochemicals that are released in moments of connection. They're also released when you're watching Toy Story and you just feel for Woody being left behind and how could he not go on with Andy? And you start to feel like a little like, oh, you're feeling this moment of connection and bonding. There are the neurochemicals like cortisol and adrenaline, which are discomfort, which is why you're watching a movie and you feel your heart racing and you think, why do I feel like I am James Bond running on the rooftop? I am just sitting in my seat, not doing anything. So when you have these feelings, it's because that's the story pulling you in. So these 5 things become principles in the book that I break down throughout that get to how are you making the brain spend calories? How are you either slowing down assumptions or leaning into them? How are you connecting people to the things that are really familiar, what they know that's going to put that image right in their head? Are you making them feel like a part of an in-group or an out-group? Or are you telling a feel-good or an uncomfortable story? These are broken down throughout because it's not enough to tell a story. The way you tell it makes a difference, and the way you're pulling the brain in makes a difference. So before I move forward, let me check and see what questions you have. Yes? Say that again?
What was the fifth one again?
That we seek pleasure and avoid pain. Yeah. That we undergo neurochemical shifts that you can change as a result of a story. Yes?
So I'm thinking about it from a neurodiversity perspective. I know, like for myself, sometimes I can't commit to 2 hours, for a movie or something like that. Can you talk about it in that way, how grabbing someone who, may be more resistant, I guess, in that way to I guess, expending that energy like you're talking?
Yeah, so when you have a range of neurodiversity, how are you making sure that their brain isn't sliding into lazy mode? And it's actually probably the opposite of lazy mode in someone who's neurodivergent. It's probably hyper processing and not focusing. It's an art, right? There's not going to be a prescriptive specific thing. The more you start to connect to the things that the people know and put together a well-structured story, the better it's going to resonate with groups like that. It doesn't have to be lengthy. The question comes up of like, how long should a story be? It's not the length, it's the structure. It's who you're telling it to that matters. Yeah.
So I don't know, we might have been starting the story because I walked up to her and I said, oh, I love your hair. But my big faux pas that I never should have said, I don't know why, I said, is that your real hair? Why did I do that? But we started a story. I did not ask her name. I mean, it ended rather abruptly because we were talking about her hair, and then I just kind of walked out. So that, I could have gone further, obviously. Any points of where we could have taken that with the story at all, or?
Well, yeah. So the hard thing about that is that actually isn't a story. That's an interaction, that's a moment. So a story is going to begin with an audience.
Okay, so it wouldn't be a one-on-one type of thing, story?
No, it could be. Let me share it and then come back to it. So an idea doesn't have a home without an audience. When it's time to tell a story, you're not taking your favorite things, your greatest hits, and pushing them at people. You're starting with, who am I telling this to, and what am I trying to have them experience? What do I want them to get out of this? Because that is where the story is going to be. So think about when a loved one asks you what you do for a living. Maybe your aunt that has no knowledge about your industry or your profession. And so you give the really diluted version. But if you are at a networking event and you see someone else in your field, you're going to give the really detailed version. It's the same thing with a story. Each story is going to be different based on who you're telling it to and what you want. What you described was an interaction. It would have to be just, what you're trying to do. If it was a moment of bonding or connection, you could build on it.
Okay, so it could be a story if I were telling it to an audience.
You need a little more to it, but sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it just kind of dropped and I felt bad about it.
Yeah.
Piggybacking off of that, yes, it is my hair.
I'm so sorry I asked this stupid question.
But, we could have created something in the event that I was going to tell her, well, we're a part of the Silver Fox Club, and Silver Foxes have experience that are beyond the millennials, per se, and we could have created something through that. Because I also wanted to mention that I also consider myself not old, but seasoned, and everybody needs a little seasoning. So we could have piggybacked off of that and created something
For sure.
Connection based on the fact that we're women of a certain age.
Absolutely. There's so many different things you could do to set context and put some tension in there. Yes.
So I'm going to take it a little different. I'm going to go back to the second last question that we had asked about sharing stories based on your audience. Now, when you do, and you have to be a presenter and present a lot, sometimes we do some detailed information based on our industry. How do we come up with a repertoire of stories with the audience? You don't keep repeating it over and over again. Is it just like going through your years of experience and coming up with and brainstorming a few stories and putting them in a diary and going, okay, I'll use this one, or how do we make that connection? Because sometimes we don't know our audience. So how do we come up with a story that could follow the 5 steps, but you can change it depending on, the difference in the rooms or conferences or something like that?
Sure. So let me clarify one thing. The 5 factory settings are not critical for every story, but they are more of these principles that you look at. The book walks through step by step of how you do it. Anytime you're going to tell a story, you are going to stop and say, what do I know about this audience? So I had no clue who was showing up today, but I made some assumptions that you either know me, or you love storytelling, or you love libraries, and you wanted to come have an interesting discussion. And so I then thought, okay, it would be interesting to talk about the book and share some of the concepts of storytelling so that you're getting some of that, but also maybe take you behind the scenes and share some of that too. So you can always go to what do I know about this group? What is common? Even if you don't know very much about it, you can make some assumptions. From there, you want to ask yourself, what do I want this audience to come away with internally? What feelings do I want them to have? What do I want them to know or feel? And what do I want them to do as a result? What is their mindset today, and what might be an obstacle? And I go through this in there where it's a question for each. So anytime you're going to tell a story, 5 minutes in the car beforehand, you're getting really grounded on who am I talking to, and what is it that I'm trying to have them come away with? Where's their mindset today that we might have to navigate, and what might be an obstacle? Every time. Yeah.
So have you ever had that situation where you're telling a story and you're looking at your audience, and you feel like your audience is just not getting it, they're not engaged? What do you do to help change that so that your audience at least appears to you to be more engaged?
Yeah, so the question of what do you do when you're mid-story and you were like, wow, this is tanking. That has never happened to me. It happens all the time. All the time. All the time. In improv, they tell you to fall on the floor, but so there's 2 parts. First part is the prep you do before you get in front of the audience, because the more you can really think about who am I telling this story to, and how do I make it really meaningful, and how do I put in little details that I think they're going to really respond to. When you've done your prep, you have to trust you've done what you can, because sometimes you can't control the temperature of the room. Did people sleep the night before? Are they hungry? Sometimes it is just falling flat and it's not clicking, and so interaction is great. Using the inflection and movement can make a difference, but it's really the prep you're doing going in that makes the difference. Yes, Ina.
How long does it take to build this? Yeah, because I'm the type that get in the story and I get right to the end, and there's nothing between. And so, as I was reading your book, I okay, I have to slow it down, I have to go through these steps. But it just seems like how long would it take me to actually develop this skill? I would say it's skill.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be different for each person, but you can start today with just even taking the mindset of their brain is going to be lazy. So I'm going to start and I'm going to feel tempted to get to the end, but let me just stick in one little very interesting sentence that's going to catch their attention. It doesn't have to be the full-blown spectrum. Even putting in similes and metaphors. I heard someone tell a story the other week of you'll remember this, Lynn, the person was talking about going to Chipotle, getting a meal, gets a drink. It's a huge drink. He goes, the drink was so big, you could bathe the baby in it. It was great. Something like that, like I remember this a week later. I don't remember the rest of the story, but I remember that piece of it. So you can start doing little things like this that are going to start to capture attention. You will develop your own version. It doesn't have to be a crazy lengthy process. The first time you do it, yeah, it's awkward, especially if you're using the steps and you're like, how am I leaning into assumptions? How am I building characters? It's like anything, it feels a little awkward, but the cool thing is you start telling stories and you get permission to tell more stories, and it has compounding interest and it gets faster. You're going to have your style of, oh, I'm gonna say this and it's just gonna work every time. I know this is great for me. Start playing with those things as you start practicing and telling some stories. Yes?
What would you, I know you're here to talk about the art of storytelling in the book, but I'm curious about your path to being a keynote speaker as well, because that's a very larger audience. It's a little bit bigger ask. And you've also done a TED Talk. Can you just talk briefly about the kind of the transition or the differences between talking to a small group like this and creating stories for us versus a keynote in that path, which is...
Yeah, so part of my job is I do get in front of large people. It's been, I've been on stages for 10,000. Which sounds really scary, but you only see this many people, so it's no big deal. Add thousands more, who cares? I don't see them. But there is a certain energy and bigness the larger the audience, because when you're the person on stage, you are responsible for the energy of that room. Think of these people that you've seen that you were like, whoo, I don't know who picked them, but that just didn't do it for me. So part of it is having something to say. Getting really clear on what is your message and who is your audience and what are you trying to do. And in the case of a keynote, it's also, I try to map out when am I putting in a story, where am I being intentional about raising the energy, and where am I okay bringing it down? Because in an hour keynote, your brain is not meant to be up here fully immersed the whole time. So where am I giving you this space so that as the audience, you're not fatigued? So I play with that, and then it is the performance piece of it. Because this is very much a part of the storytelling too, how you're bringing your face into it and your body. So I did the talk at Purdue University. I did my TED Talk at Purdue University week before COVID. The world shut down. You can thank me or blame me. And the talk went on the TEDx site and maybe got 10,000 views. Wasn't doing anything. I was trying so hard to share the heck out of it. They say that when you create something, creation is like 20% of it and promotion is 80% of it. So I was trying so hard and it was not breaking 10,000 views. Someone at TED saw it, they liked it, they put it into their jury to approve talks to go on TED.com, and 6 months later it went on there the following January, and it hit 1 million views in a couple days, and it just passed 2 million views. Same talk. Different title, I named neither of them, but huge difference. So, there was nothing different about the talk. Sometimes it's the platform and the energy to it. I'm not sure I addressed fully what you were saying, but anytime that you are speaking, whether it is large or small, the focus is always, what am I trying to do with the group and how am I trying to give them an experience? My goal is that you come away today and you feel like you had a sense of me. That's the same goal that I want for 10,000 people.
So it's like the same goal, just you need to understand your audience is the key in either situation.
Yeah, I got invited to do a keynote at a cybersecurity conference. You know what I know about cybersecurity? It is bad. That's what I know about cybersecurity. And so then it's like, all right, how do I make this relatable and interesting to them? The core messages are the same, but how do you do that? And do that in a way for a group that is very introverted and have them feel comfortable and a piece of that. And so it's always looking at your audience on that.
What kind of stories would you share with a tech-based group? Like, how would you go through and come up with a story that's relatable to a group of introverts?
So it always depends on what they're coming together for and what outcome we want people to experience. So anytime people call me for a keynote, I always start with, let's talk about your group. Why are you coming together? What is it that you want them to experience? What's that outcome that we want them to have? And as they start to talk about that, I then can test and understand, what have you done before? What are challenges that they're facing? How can we make that be different? And so I can, same process that I take you through in this, get better at that. I think there were some questions, yes?
I heard you speaking earlier with someone about neurodivergence. I have no idea what that is, and I know I can Google it, but
yeah.
Can you
So, there's a spectrum of attention, so everything from ADD, ADHD, autism, Asperger's. There's a range of, we're all on a spectrum of understanding and attention and focus, and neurodivergent is often used for people that are ADD, ADHD, Asperger's. There's a range. So people that just have different focuses to their attention.
So why is that? Why?
Her question was, you know, it's going to be harder to pay attention to a 2-hour movie because the natural pull on her attention is going to be different. And how do you take that into account when you're sharing a story? Yes.
How do we find our stories?
Yes, thank you.
I'm sure have many, but just how do you find them?
Okay, can I ask you 2 questions? Are you willing to play along with me? Yeah. Thank you. Lewis? Yeah. Everybody, this is Lewis. Lewis, I'm going to ask you 2 questions. One is going to be intentionally vague, and just answer whatever comes to mind. Tell us about your childhood.
It was wonderful. It was, yeah, I grew up I was born at a very early age.
Most of us are.
And I was raised as an only child, which really bugged my older sister. Yeah, good job.
Perfect. Okay. Second question. The sky, right? It's awesome. What sound or smell reminds you of home?
Sound or smell reminds me of home. Maybe dinner cooking. I don't know.
Is there a specific dinner, a specific like meal, maybe for holidays or birthdays?
Yeah. Hard to say. Just maybe. I think meatloaf, that was a favorite meal. Yeah, the smell of meatloaf cooking.
Okay. So what I did with Lewis was, first, thank you. Very unfair to put you on the spot, but clearly stand-up comedian over here. First question, tell me about your childhood. Your brain goes like, wait, what? What part? Childhood is like 20 years. Before school, after school, talk about my siblings. Most people, when I ask this, say, I grew up in this city, I lived in this type of housing, and these were the number of family members around us. We kind of generalize because we don't know how to answer that. But when I go to sound or smell, you go to meatloaf immediately, and then there's probably further stories in there around meatloaf and events around meatloaf and conversations and meals. What I'm doing is I'm putting constraints in place, and this is how you're going to come up with ideas for stories.
I always think of the Christmas story. That seems like my life.
The Christmas story is? Yeah. But when you reach this moment and you were like, I have no idea what story I'm going to tell, you want to put these constraints in place. So you want to think about your personal experiences. Like, what's that thing you should have gotten rid of, but you just can't quite part with? You know, what's the first thing you would save in your home if there was a fire? What were your first concerts? Your first car? Did you have a car break down? How did that go? You start to mine your experiences and you do exactly what you're doing. You sit in a chair and you start making a list. And then you go through your professional experiences. You look at how you move through the world. That comment about the person that wanted to bathe the baby in the drink came from a church service last week that I was playing the flute at. I just notice things and I collect them. And what I'm doing is I'm noticing, what do I have interest towards? What's catching my attention? Because then I put them in a list. I have a dedicated place for it. And when it's time to tell a story and I've thought through who my audience is and what I want them to do, what I want them to experience, I then go down that list and say, which one of these will help me do this? And usually it is nothing on the list. But the act of going down the list prompts a new idea. So what this does is it helps you stop. It doesn't have you start at a blank sheet of paper. And it helps you start to have an inventory of stories that you can use at any time. My cousin got a phone call last week that he had to give a toast at a business dinner that night. And he was like, what do I talk about? So we went immediately to, well, what was your first impression of your colleagues? What was the first time you heard about the company? Or your first day? Like, let's go into some of those things because people love the story behind how things came to be. Whenever you're trying to come up with the stories and you can't think of something, it's because you have too wide a space and you want to put constraints in place.
So when I first came in here, I was thinking, this is gonna be great, spur of the moment kind of, but that's not what we're not talking about spur of the moment kind of stories. Could be some, but there is research that you need to do and things that you need to know.
I suggest doing this list before you ever need to tell a story, because your brain is going to be more creative when it's not under any constraint. You're going to be more free thinking, and it's going to be easier to come up with stuff. The moment you are under a deadline or a constraint, you have an increase in cortisol, and it's that much harder to think, what do I want to do here? What should this be? So start this list today and have a place and keep adding to it. And as you see those things that intrigue you, add to that. Yeah.
Okay, so going off of that, so if you have a memory, right? But you don't know how to necessarily, so like I block out a lot of things and I don't remember, the smell of this or what this looked like. Is it that you just run with it, like take the moment and like create it, even though it's going to be different from like your actual memory?
Yeah. Did you make up a story?
Yeah.
No. No, and here's why. Think of someone that you've been listening to that you're like, I don't trust what they're saying. That doesn't feel genuine. That feels either really carefully curated or there's something not authentic there. We are amazing detectors of things that don't feel true. So I don't recommend making up stories. What I do recommend, though, is start developing the habit of capturing it when it happens or noticing. The first few times, to go to Ina's question of how long does this take, the first few times you go to build your list of stories, it is slow and it is hard. But as you do it, all of a sudden, you're going to find more and more stories and it's going to get faster and faster and faster. And you're going to start to recognize stories all around you in different moments. But don't make them up. Don't make them up. Yeah. Yes. Hi.
So we have a lot of dimensions and a lot of different stories that resonate with the audience. When do you lean into the commonality versus the differences to connect? Because it could have a different outcome, but it may play out differently depending on the direction. So when do you pull on the commonality?
Yes. How many of you have dropped your phone down an elevator shaft? You did? I never knew that. But how many of you could feel that moment of dropping your phone down the elevator shaft? So it's not that you have to lean into the commonalities, it's that how am I making this relatable by making it vivid so people can picture it or feel that emotion around it and experience it. Yeah. That's the cool thing about the stories is you don't have to use the commonalities at all. You just have to make people feel like I can experience this. I know what this would be like.
Oh, that sounds like Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park?
I love Jurassic Park, but I've never been
Right.
That sounds like what that is.
Yeah.
So I was flying to Phoenix the other week and I was watching the movie Everest. It came out in 2015. It's got Jake Gyllenhaal and Josh Brolin. It's based on the 1996 disaster on Everest where people died. I have read the book by John Krakauer. I have watched the IMAX. I even saw this movie when it came out. And I'm watching it and I am still like fiddling my knee, like, what's gonna happen? Oh my gosh, is this the moment where he dies? Like, I was in it, even though I knew what was gonna happen. And it's because of how the story was told and you're just pulled into it and your brain is imagining what that could feel like, which is always the goal. Yes?
I wonder if you ever have challenged managing your ego in such a way where you're trying to entertain. I love the way how you talk about know your audience, know what they need, know what you want to leave them with. But do you ever have that struggle where it's like you want to be in the forefront of the story and you're like, this is a great story, I want to tell this story, but it might not be the story they need?
how many of you have relatives that do this? Right? Happens all the time. And it's somewhat genuine in that person's getting something out of it. There's a reason why they're doing it. But it's the biggest mistake where we're telling the story we want to tell and not the story the audience needs to hear. So if you follow the process, you'll hit a point where you realize this is going to resonate or it's not going to resonate, and I can back up and see. But what happens most often is there's an opportunity to share a story, and I just jump right into the story that I want to tell, and I'm so excited, and I never once stop to think, who am I telling this to? And is this meaningful for them? And what tweaks can I make to this story? Even if you know the story you want to tell, it always starts with the audience. Every time I work with someone and the story fails, it's because they didn't get clear on the audience and they didn't get clear on what they wanted them to experience. I want to share in the book, what I wanted to do is help people understand the science of storytelling in a relatable way and then teach you how to tell stories. But I also wanted you to hear from different storytellers because there are so many different ways to do this. So I interviewed people from Sundance, co-founder of Sundance, someone from The Moth, Pixar, and at the end of each chapter are these vignettes of different storytellers. So I thought it might be fun to read one of them. I was going to read the one from Pixar. So this is by Will Sacklos, and he was the creative director at Pixar during Finding Nemo and Monsters, Inc. And these are interview format. So I asked him, what is your story first philosophy? He said, I worked at Pixar during what I believe was the second golden age of animation, when the young studio produced a string of extraordinary hit movies, Toy Story, Toy Story 2, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, WALL-E, and Up. My story first philosophy was informed by working with some of the best storytellers in the world. Your movie can have the best actors, the most brilliant composers, the most original story artists, and stunning special effects. But if your story isn't sound from start to finish and through its core, all of those fabulous elements combined won't turn an okay movie into a great movie. I then asked him, what are common mistakes in scripts? And he is a story consultant, so he looks for where the scripts lag. Often they have great openings but sag in the middle. Author Sid Field once said, put obstacles in front of your characters. A bridge goes out, or they blow up a tire in a chase. These things can give you a moment's bump, but it wouldn't provide lasting story energy. The solution is to create sustainable rising action, the increase in conflict and complication organically based on one character. A lot of scripts miss two things: a constellation of characters that create conflict simply by how they go about attaining what they need and want in the world. Great scripts have a number of dynamic, conflictual relationships. When created correctly, each one becomes a story engine that helps infuse the narrative with dramatic power. The second thing that will sink a script is the lack of verisimilitude, the semblance of truth, a reason to care about the characters and story. The first aspect of this is story logic, not in the literary sense, but in the sense of, does a jewel thief finally released from prison retrieve his hidden stash and then leave it out on his dresser in a cheap hotel room before falling asleep? Story logic asks the simple question, is this believable? In the case of the jewelry thief, it isn't. The moment that occurs, we disengage from the story. The other aspect of verisimilitude in storytelling is emotional truth. Are the longings, fears, decisions, and actions of characters real, measured instantly by knowing and by depth of our experience as human beings? I spoke at a conference after Finding Nemo was released. A young woman came up to me. She told me she was from San Diego and had grown up with the ocean, and she loved Finding Nemo. It was fantastic, she blurted, but real. Bingo. We care about these stories and what becomes of them because of their emotional truth. In Finding Nemo, we never question Marlin's desire to protect his son. We understand Nemo's desire to get out on his own. Great storytellers make us care deeply, feel deeply, make us laugh, and feel saddened to tears because of the truth of their portrayals. It's why we can be happily transported and transfixed by the plight of childhood toys and talking fish. I think we have time for a few more questions. Yep.
It's not a question, but it is a comment, and I'm glad that you read that, because in the book, what I loved about it was you gave the science behind it, and I was like, okay, and I love science, but those interviews kind of hit home, you know, because it gave a different perspective.
Yeah.
So I heard your perspective, I heard the science behind it, and then when I started reading these other stories, I'm like, oh, okay, I get what, you know, some of the thought processes some of these people are going through.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to.
Not gonna lie, that was a good day when they all came together. I was like,
And that's what I was wondering, like, how did you get to all these people?
yeah, so let's talk about that because there are some significant names. There's a TED Radio Hour podcast host, the person that founded Sundance with Robert Redford. Some of them I knew, some of them are in my network, but for all of them, I wrote a vulnerable email about what I was doing, why I wanted to include other voices, why I was reaching out to them, and what I would love for them to do. And then the magic is I said, I want 27 minutes of your time. Not 30, 27 minutes. And I came prepared and I stuck to 27 minutes. And in 27 minutes, I had more than enough for the book and other interviews. And they all said it was the 27 minutes that got me. It was like, okay, you're gonna honor my time and this is helpful. I intentionally wanted different industries. I didn't want the same thing over and over. So you have a medical physician, a neuroscientist, a chief marketing officer who tells this great story about her pit bull. Like they're all really different perspectives to show you the illustration. So I'm delighted that was your experience of it, yeah.
Do you feel like with all these different people that you interviewed, do you feel like they are natural storytellers?
They will all tell you they learn to get better and how editing is a big part of their process. The neuroscientist talks about he does like 80 or 90 revisions on pieces that he publishes. Yeah, a lot. I think there's probably a inclination, maybe a less barrier to entry, but they all learned, how do I get better at this? And really, how do I make this work for my audience?
I'm sorry, two-part question. So do you feel like your mind is always, like, I feel like my mind gets lazy, like it's like on the downward most of the time. But do you feel like your mind is always like looking for stories and therefore you're more in tune because you've trained yourself to be like that?
I wouldn't say looking, I would say I notice stories. So I'm not, sitting here taking notes on all of you to now work into my next story, but a moment that happens is going to catch my attention, and I know when it catches my attention, I do something with it. Or a lot of times, this reference to the baby being bathed in the Chipotle drink, I didn't do anything with, but it's there, and in moments like this, it just comes out. Yeah. We'll go back there, and then you, yes, please. You.
And what would you say is the biggest difference between storytelling orally and the written one?
I develop my stories in writing. It's how I think through them. So to me, that's easier than orally. When you are doing it in writing, you manage your pace and your cadence through the length of sentences and the way you're varying it and how you're building, right? You can describe the expressions and emotions. When you're telling it out loud, you have to think, how am I embodying Walt in that moment where he doesn't know the name of the person? How am I taking this and translating it so my body, my sound, my inflection are expressed here? So pause is a big one. Pause is that moment where the brain can catch up. So how you tell your story, there's a lot of different things to play with and how you're interpreting it. Think of it like an actor gets a script. There's so many different ways they could play with it. Yes.
Me? Yeah, my turn. So I'm an accountant, and I have to do financial review meetings every month to a bunch of engineers virtually. How do you get them to kind of engage in what you're doing and not really even knowing if they are engaged because you got these little dots on your screen going, here's John, here's Mark, here's Rhonda, it's like, how do you get them kind of part? It's not a fun story, or it could be, I guess you can say. It could be. The ins are more than the outs, is what I would say, It could be.
Yeah, so one of my clients got a call saying, you're gonna present to the CEO in a week. You have 5 minutes. You need to tell him about how the product is doing and what your recommendations are to improve it. And he is a data analytics professional that would love to get up there and put every chart he knows and be like, row 57, and then row 49. And instead, I'm like, you can't do that. So let's get that out of your system, write out every single thing you want to say that way, and then we're going to step back and we're going to find the story in it. His product is an app, and in 5 minutes, you don't have a lot of time, he told the story of decorating his home for the holidays, because this was fairly recently, and he describes how the first box he opens, there sitting on top was the ornament from his daughter's first Christmas, the silver bell. And he talked about how it just immediately took him back to that moment. And he describes decorating, and at the end of the day, he gets into bed and has this moment of like, what's not right? Wait, no, we don't have that elf on a shelf anymore. I don't have to worry about that. But he realizes, I think I left the lights on. And he grabs the app. So he tells this story, and then he goes into all of the pieces that he needs to. No charts, no slides, but then gets into, here's how it's performing, here's what I recommend. In 5 minutes, that day, 5 people presented, and the CEO walked up to one person. And he walked up to that person and started talking about his children's first Christmas. They might be dots on the other side of the screen, but they're people. And while it might not be traditional to tell a story to pull people in, it will catch their attention. And it doesn't have to be lengthy. Yes?
I just had a comment and sort of wanted to get your feedback on it. The quote in the book about, it has to have an element of, I can't remember the system, but, truthfulness versus, or logic versus the emotion part of it. And I think it strikes me that there has to be some kind of balance, because when we're going into the movies, right, there's that element of suspending disbelief, right? I'm going to allow myself to believe that fish can talk, so that I feel those emotions. So I just kind of wanted your perspective on what's that, the balance between making it believable and logical and the emotion part of it.
It's not an either or. You can connect people to what is believable and their emotions without people feeling like it's not true. It's just taking in the experience, and how do you start to describe how complicated it is when you drop a cell phone down an elevator shaft, right? It's helping people feel like they are beside you in this experience and what they would see, hear, feel, experience. I know we are at time.
Time for one more question.
Yes.
When you're writing a story in your beginning, how do you approach deciding what your audience will be? Do you think of it in terms of a big demographic?
Yeah.
Do you think of it in terms of your aunt and uncle and somebody else in the town? Given what you want to say, how do you decide how to best choose the audience to say it to?
So you don't know where you're telling the story, or you already know where you're telling it and you're trying to figure out who's in that audience?
Is there a demographic?
I'm trying to get a sense of, do you know where you're sharing this story? Like who you're sharing it with, or you don't have any idea?
Just say if I'm writing a novel or a short story.
Okay. Yep, perfect. So how are you figuring out who is that audience? I'll use my TED Talk as an example. So I was giving this in a big auditorium full of college students. So I made a persona of what are the professional, personal demographics, what's a day in a life for students. But I also had this audience that was people that were going to be watching it online, people in business that were my prospective clients. If I did it just for that audience, it wouldn't have worked in the auditorium and it would have fallen flat, which would have made the video fall flat. But if I did it just for the students, it wouldn't have worked. And so I started to work through, okay, I know in this case, this is who is seeing it. So when I think of them, what is that I'm trying to get them through? With the book, I went through, okay, obvious audience are people that are fans of the TED Talk, or people that are in business or wanting to be better storytellers. But this is also meant to help your average person. There's sections on how do you give a eulogy or a toast or job interviews. And so it's sometimes like, who's the primary, if I'm sitting across the table from someone, who is that? What does that person look like? What are their interests and experiences? And then who are those others around it? I know we are at time today. I want to thank you for your time, attention. I'm happy to take questions here, and thank you, Amy.
Thank you so much for being such a great interactive audience. We do have other author talks, writing workshops, and a bunch of other programs for adults, so be sure to pick up one of our newsletters. We love having you come to our libraries throughout the county. And a very special thanks to Karen, who I know is a library lover. And she's a local library lover, so we're very thrilled that she was able to come here and hopefully inspired you to take away some stories, and maybe we'll host you next time. So we will start the signing here, and hope we get to see you soon. Have a wonderful day.